17 years after a broken war veteran took in two abandoned children, one of them walked into a courtroom and changed the fate of the only father they had ever known. But to understand how a young man could stop a verdict that was meant to destroy the very man who saved him, we must go back to a rainy night in Baltimore, where two 7-year-old twins sat huddled in the storm, waiting for a mother who would never return. This is not just a story about abandonment, nor about war. This is a story of survival, sacrifice, and a bond stronger than blood. A story that will take you from the cold streets to the echoes of gunfire overseas, from the fragile trust of children to the crushing weight of justice gone wrong. And before we dive in, I want you to do two things for me. First, hit that subscribe button, because here we bring you stories that will grip your heart and stay with you forever. Second, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Trust me, I read them all, and it makes me feel like we're sitting in the same room, sharing this story together. The rain was merciless that night. It came down in sheets, drumming on rusted trash cans, washing the dirt from cracked sidewalks, and soaking through the thin sweaters of two little children who sat shivering under the flickering light of a broken street lamp. 7-year-old Daniel held his sister's hand tightly. Diana, his twin, leaned against him, her teeth chattering. "Mom's coming back, right?" she whispered, her voice trembling more from fear than from cold. Daniel wanted to say yes. He wanted to believe it. But the truth was, their mother had walked away hours ago, promising she'd be back with food. Instead, she had disappeared into the night, swallowed by the alleys of Baltimore's east side. The twins didn't know it yet, but she wasn't coming back. Around them, the city buzzed with indifference. Cars sped past, their headlights flashing briefly across the children's faces before disappearing. People walked by, hurrying to escape the rain, never stopping, never asking why two small children were sitting alone in the storm. Daniel hugged his sister closer. "Don't cry, Dee. I'll take care of you." But he was only 7. What could a boy of 7 do against hunger, against the cold, against the endless night? Hours stretched on. The rain eased, but the children remained, clutching each other. That was when footsteps echoed down the sidewalk, a heavy, steady rhythm, different from the hurried scurries of strangers. Out of the shadows emerged a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a limp in his left leg. His clothes were simple, a worn jacket, heavy boots, and a military cap pulled low over his eyes. His name was Michael Donovan, a veteran, once a proud soldier, now a man wrestling with his own brokenness. He paused when he saw them. His face hardened, then softened again. Something in his chest stirred. Memories he thought he had buried, the sight of children in war zones, left behind when everything else had fallen apart. Michael crouched down, his voice deep but gentle. "How? What are you two doing out here? Where are your parents?" Daniel looked up, trying to be brave. She said she was coming back." His lips trembled, but she didn't. Michael studied them. The boy's defiance, the girl's silent tears. He saw not just two children, but two lives on the edge of being lost. For a long moment, Michael said nothing. He had his own demons. Nights when he couldn't sleep. Days when the world felt too heavy. He was barely keeping himself together. What business did he have taking care of anyone else? But then Diana whispered, almost to herself, "I don't want to be alone anymore." Something broke inside Michael. He exhaled slowly, stood up, and held out his hand. "Come on," he said. "You can't stay out here. Let's get you someplace warm." The twins hesitated. Trust was not something they knew well. But Daniel felt his sister's small hand trembling in his, and he knew they couldn't survive another night like this. He took Michael's hand, and in that moment, a bond was born. Michael didn't have much. His apartment was small, barely furnished, and always too quiet. But when he brought the twins inside, wrapped them in old blankets, and warmed a can of soup on the stove, the silence seemed different. Less empty. Diana's eyes widened as she tasted the soup, blowing on the spoon carefully. "This is the best food I ever had," she whispered. Michael chuckled softly. "It's just soup, sweetheart." Daniel watched him, still cautious. "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us." Michael sat down across from them, his gaze steady. "Because once, someone helped me when I had nothing. I wouldn't be here if they hadn't. Now, maybe it's my turn." The twins didn't fully understand, but they felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: safety. That night, as they curled up under borrowed blankets, Daniel whispered to his sister, "Maybe he's the one. Maybe we're not alone anymore." But what none of them knew, not Michael, not Daniel, not Diana, was that this fragile beginning would set the stage for 17 years of love, struggle, sacrifice, and a courtroom showdown that would test everything they had built together. Michael never thought his small two-bedroom house on the edge of town would ever feel alive again. For years, silence had been his only companion. Silence broken only by the creak of his old rocking chair or the clink of a glass as he nursed himself to sleep. But now, laughter, real, bubbling laughter, began to seep through the walls. It was Daniel and Diana. They were still adjusting, still skittish, still carrying the weight of the night he found them, but little by little, they were thawing. One evening, Michael came home from the store carrying grocery bags, and he found Diana sitting cross-legged on the floor, sketching something on a scrap of notebook paper. He leaned down. "What's that, kiddo?" She looked up shyly, her pencil hovering. "It's us," she said softly. Michael blinked. On the paper, Diana had drawn 3 stick figures, one tall one, labeled Michael, and 2 smaller ones, Daniel and Diana. Above them, she'd scrawled a shaky word in block letters: family. For a moment, Michael couldn't speak. His throat tightened, and he had to turn away quickly, pretending to put the groceries down. Nobody had called him family in years. But then, from the hallway, Daniel's voice broke the fragile moment. "We're not staying here forever, right? You'll probably send us back." Michael turned. The boy's eyes weren't angry, just cautious. Guarded. Like he'd been promised too many things in life that people never kept. Michael crouched so he was eye level with him. "Listen, Daniel," he said firmly. "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but as long as you're under my roof, you're not going anywhere. Not unless you want to." Daniel stared at him for a long moment. Then he gave the smallest of nods, though his arms stayed crossed tight against his chest. The weeks rolled into months. Seasons changed, and Michael, without realizing it, began to change too. He found himself cutting back on the drinking, because he wanted to be alert in case the twins needed him. He took extra jobs, fixing fences and odd repairs around town, because the kids had appetites, and he wanted them fed well. And at night, instead of drowning in nightmares, he started telling Daniel and Diana stories from his service. Sanitized versions. The kind that made them lean forward wide-eyed, not the kind that made him wake up screaming. But still, darkness lingered. One night during a thunderstorm, Michael jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The booming thunder outside had dragged him back to the battlefield, back to the explosions, the screams, the chaos he thought he'd buried. And when he opened his eyes, he realized something. Daniel and Diana were standing at his bedroom door, watching. Diana's voice was trembling. "Michael, are you okay?" He wiped his face quickly, trying to smile. "Just a bad dream. Go back to bed." But Daniel stepped forward. "You were yelling," he said, his tone steady but concerned, "like you were scared." For a long moment, Michael didn't know what to say. A soldier admitting fear to a child? Impossible. But then he saw their eyes, wide, vulnerable, needing honesty. So he sat up. "Yeah," he admitted quietly. "I get scared sometimes. I've seen things I can't forget. But having you two here, it makes the nights easier." And that was the moment the wall cracked. The kids weren't the only ones being saved. As the years passed, the bond grew stronger. Diana became the heart of the home, always the first to hug Michael when he came through the door, always quick with a joke or a sketch to lighten the mood. Daniel grew into Michael's shadow, helping with chores, learning to fix things, asking endless questions about tools, cars, and even the military. But even as life began to settle into a fragile kind of peace, the outside world never forgot about Michael Donovan. One afternoon, when Daniel was 15 and Diana was 15 too, both now in high school, Michael received a letter. A thick envelope, stamped with a government seal. He sat at the table, hands trembling as he tore it open. His eyes scanned the words and his jaw clenched. It was about an old mission, a mission gone wrong. And now an investigation was being reopened. Michael didn't notice, but Daniel was standing in the hallway, watching silently. The boy's eyes narrowed as he saw the worry crease Michael's face. "What is it?" Daniel asked. Michael quickly folded the papers. "Nothing you need to worry about, son." But Daniel knew. He knew something was coming, something that could shatter the only family they'd ever known. And he silently promised himself, whatever it was, he wouldn't let Michael face it alone. But in the shadows, the past is waking up. The investigation into Michael's military service looms like a storm on the horizon, one that could tear everything apart. The years with Michael had given Daniel and Diana something they thought they'd never have: stability. But stability is fragile, and sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. It started in whispers. "Hey, aren't those the twins that the old drunk soldier picked up? That man's dangerous. My cousin said he saw him yelling at night, talking to ghosts. Yeah, PTSD or something. Watch out." The words floated around the town, poisonous, slipping into the twins' ears when they walked home from school. Daniel clenched his fists one too many times, ready to swing. But Diana, ever the voice of reason, would grab his wrist. "Not here, Danny. Don't give them a reason," she would whisper, her eyes shining with tears she tried so hard to hide. Michael knew. He always knew. He could see it in their faces when they came through the door, the way their shoulders sagged. One evening, when Daniel stomped in and slammed the door, Michael set down his coffee mug and asked quietly, "Who was it this time?" Daniel tried to brush it off. "No one. Doesn't matter." But Michael wasn't fooled. His voice was calm but firm. "Daniel, don't lie to me. It matters. You matter." Diana finally broke. "They said you're broken, that you scream at night, that you're," her voice cracked, "that you're dangerous." Silence. The kind that fills a room and squeezes the air out of your chest. Michael closed his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the darkening street. His broad shoulders slumped, and for the first time, the twins saw him look small. "They're not wrong," Michael said at last. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I have screamed at night. I have seen things, done things I'll never forget. War doesn't leave you clean, kids. It stains you." Daniel's jaw dropped. Diana gasped. They had never heard him speak like this. Michael turned, his eyes glistening. "But I'll tell you this, I would never, never lay harm on you two. You saved me from my ghosts more than you'll ever know. Don't you ever doubt that." For the first time, the twins saw Michael not as an unshakable protector, but as a man broken in places they couldn't see. But the world wasn't done testing them. That winter, a man in a black sedan began parking across the street some nights, just sitting there, headlights off, watching. Diana noticed first. "Daniel, that car, it's been here 3 nights in a row." Daniel narrowed his eyes. Probably nothing. But in his gut, he knew better. The 4th night, Michael confronted it. He walked straight out the front door, boots heavy on the frost-covered ground, fists balled tight. The twins watched from the window, hearts hammering. Michael stopped in front of the car. His voice was low, dangerous. "You've had enough fun watching. Step out." The door creaked open. A tall man in a gray coat emerged, his badge flashing under the streetlight. "Mr. Donovan, former Sergeant Michael Donovan?" Michael stiffened. The twins couldn't hear what came next, but they saw the exchange. Michael's face went pale, then hard as stone. He nodded once, turned on his heel, and marched back inside. Daniel and Diana rushed to him. "Who was that?" What's going on? Michael's voice was clipped. Just someone from the past. He brushed past them, but his hands were trembling. That night, the nightmares came back worse than ever. The twins woke to his screams of men's names, of explosions, of betrayal. The next morning, Michael sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands. "Kids," he said slowly, "if anything ever happens to me, you take care of each other. Promise me." Diana's eyes widened. "Michael, stop, you're scaring me." "I mean it." His voice was iron. "Promise me." Daniel's fists clenched. "What's going on, Michael? Who was that man?" Michael didn't answer. He just stared at the coffee mug in his hands as though it could swallow him whole. Weeks later, a letter arrived. An official letter stamped with a government seal. Daniel tore it open before Michael could. His heart stopped. Michael snatched it away, but not before Daniel had read the words: "Formal inquiry, possible charges, military misconduct." The world tilted. Diana's hand flew to her mouth. "What does that mean?" she cried. Michael's face was gray. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "It means the past has finally caught me, and it's not letting go this time." The twins froze, their world cracking beneath their feet. The father figure who saved them from abandonment may now be ripped away by forces they don't understand. The letter wasn't just paper, it was a bomb. And once it landed in Michael's home, everything began to unravel. At first, the twins tried to believe it was nothing. "It's just some misunderstanding," Diana said, her voice trembling as she folded laundry that didn't need folding. "Michael hasn't done anything wrong. He's not that kind of person." But the world outside their front door wasn't as forgiving. Whispers grew louder. Teachers pulled Daniel and Diana aside in the hallways. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street. One afternoon, Daniel stormed into the house, fists raw from punching a brick wall. "They called you a killer, Michael. Said the army's finally after you for the things you did." Michael, sitting at the kitchen table, didn't even look up. His shoulders slumped, and in his hand, the letter trembled. "They're not entirely wrong," he muttered. The words hit Daniel like a slap. "What do you mean?" Michael raised his head, eyes shadowed with memories darker than midnight. "War isn't clean, son. Sometimes the orders are wrong. Sometimes the people giving them don't care about right or wrong. And when you follow those orders," his voice cracked, "you carry them for life." Diana stepped forward, tears brimming. "But they're saying you committed misconduct. That's not just orders, Michael. That's betrayal." Michael's jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked ashamed. Truly ashamed. "They're accusing me of abandoning my unit during an ambush. They're saying men died because of me." Silence. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Daniel shook his head violently. "No, I don't believe that. You'd never." But Michael's gaze flickered, haunted. He didn't confirm. He didn't deny. The summons came a week later. A thick envelope, a date, a location, a trial. Daniel crumpled it in his hands. "They want to put you on trial like a criminal? After everything you gave this country?" Michael said nothing. He just stared out the window, his face unreadable. That night, Diana overheard him on the phone. His voice was low, desperate. "I can't do this again. They'll hang me for it. Please, there has to be another way." She didn't hear who was on the other end. But she heard something in Michael's tone she had never heard before: fear. The day of the pre-trial hearing, the courthouse was packed. Reporters lined the steps like vultures. Cameras flashed. Neighbors whispered. Some hissed at the twins as they followed Michael inside. Look at them, raised by a traitor. Poor kids, probably just like him. Daniel's fists balled, but Diana clung to his arm. Don't. That's what they want. Inside, Michael sat stiff as the charges were read aloud. Words like dereliction of duty, willful abandonment, culpable negligence. Each one landed like a hammer. The twins sat behind him, numb. At the end, the judge announced, the full trial will proceed in 3 months. Until then, the accused will remain under close watch. Close watch. It sounded harmless, but the look in the prosecutor's eyes was anything but. That night, the three of them sat in silence around the dinner table. No one touched the food. Finally, Daniel slammed his fork down. "This is garbage. We can't just sit here and let them destroy you." Michael gave a hollow laugh. "And what do you suggest, son? That we march into Washington and demand they see it your way?" Daniel's face burned red. "We'll prove them wrong. We'll find the truth." Michael shook his head. "The truth doesn't matter in these cases. All they want is a scapegoat, someone to pin it on. And right now, that's me." Diana's voice cracked. "Then we'll fight. We'll fight with you, Michael." Michael looked at them both, his eyes wet, his hands trembling. "I took you in when no one else wanted you. I swore to protect you, but I can't let you throw your lives away for me." Daniel shot up, his chair screeching across the floor. "We owe you. You saved us from the streets, Michael. You gave us a home. If they want to fight," he slammed his fist into his chest, "they're gonna get one." For the first time in weeks, Michael's lips curved into the faintest smile. A tired, broken smile. But the storm was only beginning. Because just when the twins thought it couldn't get worse, a news broadcast lit up every television in town. On the screen, Michael Donovan's photo, his record, his charges, his alleged desertion. The anchor's voice was sharp. "Tonight, the decorated veteran accused of betraying his own men faces a military tribunal. If found guilty, he could spend the rest of his life behind bars." Daniel froze, fists trembling. Diana's tears spilled over. Michael turned the TV off. His voice was hoarse. "Kids, the country I served has already decided. Now it's just a matter of how hard they'll come down. The man who once rescued 2 abandoned children is now painted as a national disgrace. And unless the twins act fast, the man who gave them a home may lose his own freedom forever." The courtroom was heavy with silence, broken only by the shuffling of papers and the occasional cough. Michael sat at the defense table, shoulders squared but eyes tired. His uniform jacket, though pressed and proper, could not hide the weight he carried. This was not just about medals or honor. It was about everything he had lived for. Across the room, the prosecution painted him as negligent, a man who had abandoned his duty in a crucial mission overseas years ago. If found guilty, his reputation would be destroyed, his pension stripped, his freedom gone. Michael clenched his fists, not because he was afraid of prison, but because of the injustice of it all. He had sacrificed everything for his country and for the children he had raised as his own, and now it felt like the world was turning its back on him. But he was not alone. "Objection, Your Honor." The voice came firm, steady, and surprisingly youthful. Every head turned. Standing tall in his crisp navy blue suit was Daniel, no longer the lost boy Michael had once rescued, but a man of law. His dark eyes blazed with conviction, his jaw set like steel. He was only 24, but his presence filled the courtroom. The judge regarded him curiously, almost surprised by his confidence. Daniel had been preparing for this moment for years. Not to defend just anyone, but the man who had given him and his sister a second chance at life. Michael's eyes softened as he looked at him. For a brief moment, his mind drifted back. A small living room, cluttered with second-hand furniture. 10-year-old Daniel sat at the table, struggling through homework. Michael leaned over him, gently guiding his hand across the page. "You've got a sharp mind, kid. Don't waste it. One day, you're going to speak for people who can't speak for themselves." That day had come. But Daniel wasn't the only one fighting. In the gallery, moving quietly with her notebook and recorder, was Diana. No longer the shy, tearful girl Michael had once consoled on cold nights, but a fierce, investigative journalist whose pen could cut deeper than any blade. 15-year-old Diana followed Michael around the yard with a notepad. "Why do you always plant flowers instead of just grass?" she asked. Michael chuckled. "Because flowers leave beauty behind, even when they're gone. People remember beauty." She had scribbled those words down and never forgotten them. Now, at 24, Diana wielded her words like weapons of truth. For weeks, she had been digging into the charges brought against Michael. She had traced old communications, spoken with retired officers, even tracked down a whistleblower who had long been silenced. What she uncovered was chilling. Documents that proved Michael had been set up as a scapegoat for a failed mission, while those truly responsible climbed the ranks untouched. But Diana knew that in the world of journalism, truth wasn't enough. It had to be timed, presented, undeniable. And so she worked in sync with Daniel, feeding him leads, delivering evidence, preparing to drop the story at the precise moment it would shatter the prosecution's case. Back in the courtroom, the prosecutor smirked, tossing damning reports onto the table. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what we see here is gross negligence, covered up for years. A commander who made choices that cost lives. He should be held accountable. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Michael lowered his head, feeling the weight of betrayal. But then Daniel rose again. His voice was calm, but his words cut sharp. You're painting a picture, but you've chosen the wrong villain. My client didn't abandon his duty. He was betrayed by a system that needed someone to blame. The prosecutor scoffed. And do you have proof of this supposed betrayal? A pause. Then Daniel turned slowly toward the gallery. Diana stood. In her hand, a thick folder, pages upon pages of evidence she had unearthed. She walked down the aisle, heels striking the wooden floor with purpose, and placed the documents on the defense table. This, Daniel announced, holding the first sheet high, is a series of internal memos the prosecution conveniently left out. It proves that Michael was ordered to take the fall. These are signed by higher-ranking officials, the very people now claiming his negligence. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel for order. The prosecution scrambled, flipping through the papers, their faces paling with each page. For the first time in weeks, Michael lifted his head, eyes shining. He glanced at Diana, who gave him the faintest nod, and at Daniel, who stood like a warrior at his side. The children he had once carried out of despair were now carrying him, and the battle was only beginning. The courtroom felt like a storm. Papers rustled, whispers spread like wildfire, and the prosecution's once smug expression had twisted into desperation. But desperate men can be dangerous. Your Honor, the prosecutor barked, slamming his palm against the desk. This so-called evidence is inadmissible. It was obtained illegally. The defense is trying to manipulate this court with half-baked journalism and emotional appeals. The jury shifted uneasily. Some looked unconvinced. Others seemed swayed. But Daniel didn't flinch. He had been waiting for this. Your Honor, Daniel said firmly, the documents were not obtained illegally. They were made available through a whistleblower who feared retaliation if they came forward. And my sister, an investigative journalist, simply did her job. Truth has no agenda, Your Honor. It only reveals what those in power want hidden. A ripple of approval stirred through the gallery, but the prosecutor wasn't done. He sneered. Oh, so now we're supposed to trust a child of the accused? A defense lawyer barely out of law school and his journalist sister who just happens to discover the perfect evidence? How convenient. Gasps filled the courtroom. Michael's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout, to defend his children, but Daniel placed a calming hand on his arm. He looked directly at the jury. When I was 7 years old, Daniel began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. I was abandoned, left with nothing but fear and hunger. And do you know who picked me up from the gutter? Who fed me, clothed me, and gave me back my dignity? That man, Michael. He is not my father by blood, but he is my father in every way that counts. The courtroom grew still. Even the judge leaned forward. Daniel continued, his tone sharpening. And today I stand here not only as his lawyer, but as proof of the kind of man he is. A man who sacrifices everything for others. So no, this is not convenient. This is justice. The prosecutor's face reddened. Objection. Emotional manipulation. Overruled, the judge said, her voice quiet but firm. Proceed. But the prosecution had one last card. They stood and produced another file. "Members of the jury," the prosecutor announced, "what the defense isn't telling you is that Michael disobeyed direct orders. Here are the records of his refusal signed and logged. He went rogue, and people died because of it." The jury gasped again. Michael's face drained of color. He remembered those orders, the ones that would have sent men into a slaughter. He had chosen differently, saving lives but breaking the chain of command. Daniel's mind raced. If this stuck, the case could collapse. But then Diana rose from her seat in the gallery. Calm, deliberate, fearless. "That's not the whole truth," she said loudly, forcing the judge to acknowledge her. "I have with me testimony from surviving soldiers of that mission. They'll tell you what really happened, that Michael's refusal to follow those suicidal orders is the reason they're still alive today." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. The prosecutor stammered, trying to regain control, but the tide had turned. Michael, who had sat silent all this time, finally looked at his children. His voice broke as he whispered, "You two, you've done more than I ever could." For the first time, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Diana squeezed her father's hand. The gavel banged. "Order in the court," the judge commanded. "We will reconvene tomorrow morning with these testimonies. Until then, this court is adjourned." As the jury filed out, the prosecutor stormed past, muttering threats. The battle wasn't over. But that night, as the three of them walked out into the cool evening air, something was clear. Michael was no longer standing alone. The children he had once saved from despair were now saving him from ruin. And in the morning, the final verdict would determine everything. The next morning, the courtroom was packed to the brim. News crews, veterans, ordinary citizens, everyone wanted to witness the fate of Michael, the man branded a traitor by some and a hero by others. Daniel straightened his tie, Diana flipped open her notepad, and Michael sat between them, his weathered hands trembling slightly. He looked less like the man accused and more like a soldier, ready for one last stand. The judge banged her gavel. "Court is now in session. The defense may proceed with their witnesses." The door creaked open, and the first soldier walked in. A man in his 40s, his posture stiff but his eyes haunted. He took the oath and sat. "Please state your name," Daniel asked. "Sergeant Robert Hayes." "And your relation to the mission in question?" Hayes' voice cracked. "I was one of the men ordered into what we all knew was a death trap. If we had followed the original command, none of us would be here today. Captain Michael disobeyed those orders, and because he did, we lived." Gasps rippled across the room. The prosecutor shot up. "Speculation! The sergeant cannot speak for every soldier." Hayes' gaze hardened. "I don't need to speak for everyone, because half the platoon is sitting right outside this courtroom. They all have the same story." One by one, more soldiers filed in. Faces hardened by war, softened by gratitude. Each testified. Each painted the same picture. Michael had saved lives, not endangered them. Finally, Diana rose. She wasn't supposed to speak. She wasn't on the legal team, but the judge allowed it. "Your Honor," Diana said, her voice strong, "I investigated this case not as Michael's daughter, but as a journalist. I found emails, reports, and even confessions from higher officers admitting they used Michael as a scapegoat to cover their own failures. The truth is, they needed someone to blame, and they chose the man who had no one to defend him." The prosecutor paled. "This is outrageous." "Silence," the judge snapped. Daniel stepped forward for his closing. He looked directly at the jury. 17 years ago, I was a child abandoned on the streets. That man took me in when no one else would. Today, you've heard the truth. Michael is not a traitor. He is a protector. He is a hero. And if justice means anything in this courtroom, it means setting him free. Silence. Every breath felt suspended. The judge turned to the jury. "You may deliberate." Minutes ticked into an hour. Michael's heart pounded. Diana gripped his arm, whispering, "No matter what, we believe in you." Finally, the jury filed back in. The foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Captain Michael Donovan." The room froze. Reporters raised their pens. Michael closed his eyes. "Not guilty on all charges." The courtroom erupted. Applause, tears, shouts of relief. Michael fell into his children's arms, sobbing. Daniel hugged him tightly, whispering, "You're free, Dad. You're finally free." Diana pressed her forehead to his. "They tried to bury you, but we dug out the truth." Even the judge smiled faintly, tapping her gavel to restore order. This court recognizes Captain Michael not as a traitor, but as a man of honor. Case dismissed. As they left the courthouse, sunlight spilled over them. Cameras flashed, but Michael ignored them. His eyes were only on Daniel and Diana. "You two saved me," he whispered, voice thick with gratitude. "I gave you a home, but you gave me my life back." Daniel shook his head. "No, Dad. You gave us everything first. This was just us returning the favor." Diana smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "And from now on, you'll never face anything alone again." Michael looked out at the horizon, his heart finally unburdened. For the first time in years, the veteran felt peace. And the world now knew the truth, that even in betrayal, sacrifice, and abandonment, love and loyalty could still win. The courthouse steps were still buzzing with noise when Michael, Daniel, and Diana slipped away from the crowd. For once, the cameras didn't matter. What mattered was the quiet moment between a father and the two children he had rescued from the edge of despair 17 years ago. Michael's voice was husky. "When I first found you two, I thought I was saving you. But truth is, you saved me too. You gave me a reason to keep going. And today, you gave me back my honor." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "And you gave us a family when we had nothing. That's what real fathers do." Diana, her eyes still red from crying, whispered, "We were abandoned once, but because of you, we never felt alone again." The three embraced, right there on the courthouse steps, while the world looked on. Strangers clapped, some wiping away tears. Veterans saluted. And though Michael had been cleared in the eyes of the law, it was this moment, the embrace of his children, that truly set him free. But let me leave you with this thought. Sometimes, the people you least expect to change your life do. A soldier who once walked alone now had two children who would carry his legacy of loyalty and courage forever. And to you watching right now, what do you think? Was Michael's act of saving Daniel and Diana all those years ago destiny? Or just a soldier following his heart? Tell us in the comments, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this one. And let us know where you're watching from. It helps us feel even closer to this incredible family we're building here. Because in the end, stories like Michael's remind us all, family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the bond forged in fire, the bond that can never be broken.